Today, we are absolutely flooring the throttle and exploring the undisputed pinnacle of two-wheeled motorsport. We're talking about Grand Prix motorcycle racing, a sport where engineering genius meets raw human bravery on asphalt ribbons all around the globe. Whether you're an adrenaline junkie drawn to the sheer speed or an engineering geek fascinated by cutting-edge mechanics, you are definitely in the right place. Just think about this for a second. What actually happens when you take a roaring, custom-built 290 horsepower prototype engine and strap it to a frame that's balancing on just two tiny contact patches of rubber? Well, the answer is a physics-defying spectacle of speed, strategy, and absolute survival. Today, we're going to break down exactly how these unbelievable machines work, how the sport has evolved over the years, and what it truly takes to tame them. So, here's our starting grid for today's explainer. 1. The ultimate racing prototypes. 2. Evolution of the engines. 3. Anatomy of a MotoGP beast. 4. Surviving the race weekend. And 5. Legends of the track. All right, let's hit the throttle. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The ultimate racing prototypes. You know, it's pretty easy to look at a motorcycle race and think, hey, that kind of looks like the sports bike I saw down at the dealership. But in reality, there is a massive, and I mean massive, gulf between a superbike and a Grand Prix machine. Superbikes are basically just heavily modified versions of road-going motorcycles that you and I could actually go out and buy. Grand Prix bikes, on the other hand, they are entirely purpose-built racing prototypes. They're strictly unavailable for purchase, 100% illegal to ride on public roads, and they cost an astronomical amount to develop. Literally every single millimeter is designed with one singular purpose: to go faster than anything else on the planet. Moving on to our warm-up lap, Section 2, Evolution of the Engines. So the World Championship was officially launched by the governing body, the FIM, way back in 1949. That actually makes it the oldest established motorsport world championship. And the historical shifts since then have been wild. We saw a huge rebranding and technological leap in 2002, which birthed the modern MotoGP name. Then a jump up to these massive 1,000cc engines in 2012. And looking ahead, there's a massive regulation reset slated for 2027 that's going to shrink the engines down to 850cc. But you know, the most pivotal moment is undoubtedly what happened in 2002. Right, so before 2002, the premier class was known simply as 500 cc's, and it was ruled by these terrifyingly unpredictable two-stroke engines. Two strokes produce power with every single rotation of the crank, making them incredibly aggressive and famously difficult to ride. But rule changes in 2002 allowed manufacturers to bring in 990cc four-stroke engines. The whole idea was to phase out those wild two-strokes, and man, it worked instantly. The four-strokes just had this enormous power advantage, and by 2003, not a single two-stroke remained on the MotoGP grid. Hitting the apex now, Section 3, Anatomy of a MotoGP beast. Now, what's really interesting here is the extreme step-up in power across the three official World Championship tiers. Down in Moto3, you've got these 250cc single-cylinder engines, pushing over 55 brake horsepower, which is a great starting point, right? Then Moto2 jumps up to a 765cc Triumph engine, pushing over 140 horsepower. But then, look at the premier class, MotoGP. We're talking 1,000cc V4 or inline-4 engines that detonate with over 290 horsepower. It is just an absolute explosion of energy. But why does this insane power output actually matter so much? Well, it's because these bikes have a strictly enforced minimum weight requirement of around 158 to 160 kilograms. So when you combine that relatively feather-light weight with over 290 horsepower, you get a terrifying power-to-weight ratio of roughly 1.85 brake horsepower per kilogram. And that isn't just some fun trivia stat. This ratio dictates a desperate lap-by-lap balancing act. I mean, the sheer force constantly wants to lift that front wheel right off the ground. The engineering required just to keep the bike planted is honestly staggering. So the crucial point is that the FIM governing bodies constantly have to change the rules just to keep these bikes from flying away or becoming way too dangerous. Take a look at what's coming in 2027. Engine displacement is being dropped to 850 cc's just to curb some of that raw top speed. They're mandating 100% sustainable fuels, and radically, they are completely banning ride height and hole shot devices. You know, those complex mechanisms that compress the bike's suspension to help it accelerate off the line. They're also tightening up the aerodynamics. It's this endless push and pull between brilliant engineers trying to find speed and rule makers trying to maintain safety. All right, let's shift gears. Section 4, Surviving the Race Weekend. A Grand Prix race is basically a supreme test of athletic endurance. The main Sunday event is a grueling 45-minute all-out sprint. There are 0 scheduled pit stops for fuel or tires. You literally just manage what you have from start to finish. And to make the weekend even more physically demanding, back in 2023, the sport threw in a half-distance sprint race on Saturdays for extra championship points. So yeah, that means twice the racing, twice the danger, and absolutely twice the physical exhaustion. Now, I know I just said there are no scheduled pit stops, but what happens if it rains? Well, that's when we get one of the most exciting maneuvers in all of motorsport, the flag-to-flag roar. When the white flag waves for rain, riders can dart into the pits and physically leap off their dry bike directly onto an identical second bike that's tuned for the wet. But it's not just swapping to deeply grooved wet tires. They actually swap to steel brake rotors. Why? Because the standard carbon brakes these bikes use require immense, searing heat to function properly. If rain hits carbon brakes, the water cools them down way too much, rendering them basically useless. It's just a fascinating little tactile detail of the sport. Of course, we really have to talk about the danger here. If a rider pushes too hard and loses grip, they might experience a low side, which is basically sliding out onto the pavement. But the absolute terror of the track, that's the high side. This is a catastrophic crash where sliding tires suddenly regain their grip on the track surface. The bike violently snaps back upright, acting like a giant mechanical slingshot that literally catapults the rider high into the air and right over the top of the motorcycle. Modern traction control has definitely helped reduce these, but man, when they happen, they are truly brutal. Let's move on and see how this all builds up. Section 5, Legends of the Track. Let this number sink in for a second. 368.6 kilometers per hour. That is roughly 229 miles per hour. This is the all-time premier class top speed record set by Jorge Martin on an Aprilia during the 2026 Italian Grand Prix. Just imagine being completely exposed to the elements, trusting 2 tiny patches of rubber while traveling at the speed of a high-speed bullet train. It takes a completely different breed of human for sure. And right on the heels of that, here's another astonishing number, 15. This represents Giacomo Agostini's historic, untouchable record of world championship titles across the 350cc and 500cc classes. The guy holds 122 race wins. In our modern era of hyper-competitive racing, it's a record that frankly seems entirely impossible to duplicate. And this brilliantly illustrates the caliber of greatness we're dealing with, especially when you look at the modern titans who have chased those legendary records. You've got Valentino Rossi, an absolute pop culture icon with 7 Premier Class titles, who famously became the final champion of that wild 500cc two-stroke era back in 2001, before going on to absolutely dominate the 4-strokes. Then you have Marc Mez, who stormed into the Premier Class, became the youngest ever champion in his rookie year, and also holds 7 Premier Class titles. Watching these titans push human engineering to its breaking point is exactly what makes this sport so captivating. Which brings us to the future. In 2025, Formula One's parent company, Liberty Media, purchased Dorna, the commercial rights holder of MotoGP. So we're standing on the precipice of a massive shift, with fresh ownership looking to expand the sport's global footprint and those radical new 850cc engine regulations hitting the grid in 2027. I'm going to leave you with this question. Will MotoGP's next era be its fastest and most dominant yet? Or will this huge technical reset make it the most fiercely unpredictable racing we have ever seen? I guess we'll just have to watch the lights go out to find out. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity revving.